Good morning, grace and peace. It's good to be back and to be with you and worship with you. If you haven't texted the word hello to the number on the screen, do that right now. It will send you a link to the Bible app. In the Bible app, you will not only find the notes of the sermon, but you will also find all the announcements, opportunity to interact during the service, including giving. You can share that which you are learning, the passage that was preached today. You can share the notes. You can share some of the quotes that I'm going to use today. So I encourage you deeply to do that. Text the word hello to the number on the screen. Even if you're at home watching us online, you can text hello to 786-789-3060, all right? Okay, so like I said, we were gone for 2 weeks. Not 2 weeks, 2 Sundays. We were gone for 2 Sundays, 9 days. We were in Brazil with the family and the kids. It's been 4 years, I think, since we took our children to Brazil to be with family. I don't think that they had met our youngest daughter, so it was a great experience. We stayed on the beach and then up on the mountains, and then we came back. And when we came back, we were excited to find out that our house, which is under contract, is about to close. Now, this is interesting. So we're selling this house now. We've owned this house for about 9 years or so, and I was reflecting upon my homeowning experience, right? Because this is the first house that I've ever owned, and pretty much the first house that I ever lived. Now, I was born in a house, not literally born in a house, but I was born to parents that owned a house at the time when I was born. But at the age of 4, my parents moved to condos, and we lived in condos ever since, in many different places, but we always lived in condo. In fact, when my wife and I moved to Miami 11 years ago, we rented a condo first, and then the market crashed and collapsed in 2009, and then we bought this house that we're selling right now. And we've had great memories in this house because our, 2 younger daughters were pretty much born there, and great memories. We had a great time. But I had no idea that the American dream that we entered into costs so much time, so much work, and so much money. Okay, so for many reasons, I'm actually glad that we're selling this house because of all the work and all the time and all the money that it has required from us. I thought that the American dream would ultimately deliver on its promise, but it never delivers ultimately on its promise. Now, maybe you have not had that experience with homeowning. But I'm sure that you've had experiences like that in life, that you thought that they would deliver on their promises and they ended up under-delivering. Maybe it was a restaurant. Somebody told you, oh, this restaurant has great food. You go there and it's not that great and you're disappointed. Some of you it's been with work. Some of you have been with relationships. You have looked at things in your life, I'm sure, and you've hoped that they would deliver on their promises, and you felt that you had bought because of false advertising, right? And they under-delivered. And that is the case with religion as well. This is what this letter that we're going through in the past few weeks is all about. The Apostle Paul is saying that, once you began your relationship with Christ to this early church in the city of Galatia, you were filled with joy, but now you are becoming very religious. And if you begin to live a religious life, it will always under-deliver on its promise. Ultimately, you will begin to experience a loss of freedom in your life. Religion robs us of freedom. So that's why we're saying throughout this series that we must lose our religion. That's why the Apostle Paul is encouraging this church. Don't be religious. Be about the relationship with Christ. Because religion will rob you of your freedom. Ultimately, your freedom is at stake. So let's ask 3 questions. Number 1, why does religion rob us of freedom? Then how? Let's learn how religion robs us of freedom. And then lastly, let's end with a hopeful note. What can free us from the bondage of our religions? Okay? So first, why religion robs us of freedom. According to the Apostle Paul in this letter to the church in Galatia, in synthesis, what he's saying is that all that is not gospel is idolatry. all that is not that which God has done and has gifted you with, all that you are required to do is idolatry, right? The gospel is, it is done. Religion says do, right? So all that is not gospel, according to Paul, is idolatry. Now, right now, I like to do two things. I'd like to define idolatry, and then secondly, I'd like us to admit idolatry. It's going to be a hard part of the sermon, but I think we can only move forward if we come to an understanding that we ourselves are idolaters as well. So first, let's define what idolatry is. What is idolatry? Idolatry is looking at something else other than Christ for salvation. It's looking at something else other than Christ for salvation. What's happening here with this church? Look at what the Apostle Paul says in verse 8. Formerly, when you did not know God, you were enslaved to those that by nature are not God's. But now that you have come to know God, or rather to be known by God, how can you turn back again to the weak and worthless elementary principles of the world, whose slaves you want to be once more? You observe days and months and seasons and years. I am afraid that I have labored over you in vain. What's happening here? The Galatians are Greek converts to Christianity. So the city of Galatia today exists in modern day Turkey, but back then the world was Hellenized, so that was a Greek town. These were Greek pagan people who had come to faith in Jesus. Now the problem was they were now going to church with other pagan converts and with some Jewish converts as well. These are people that had a Jewish background who had also become Christians. And what was happening was that the Jewish Christians were telling the Gentiles and the Greek converts, look, Jesus is good, but it's not enough. And therefore, if you want to live a life as a child of God, you have to live as a Jewish person as well. You have to observe the Jewish calendar, all the different Jewish celebrations. That's what the Apostle Paul is talking about here in these verses. You have to observe the Jewish dietary laws. You have to eat like a Jewish person. You have to eat kosher. And by the way, if you're a male, you have to be circumcised. And these people were submitting themselves to that because they wanted the approval of these Jewish Christians. They wanted to feel like they were part of God's people for real, right? And the Apostle Paul looks at that and he says, is this crazy or what? I feel like I actually have been wasting my time with you, because I can't even recognize you. See, so from verses 12, which is not printed in your handout, but it's in the Bible app, from verses 12 through verse 20, the Apostle Paul is saying to them, look, you are not the same people that I came and I spent time with, that I preached the gospel, that believed the gospel, that lived out the gospel with me. You guys have changed so much. In fact, if you insist in this way of life, if you insist in looking at the law or a code of morality for your salvation, which is now no longer Christ, but now you're putting your trust and your hope in the law and in morality, you are resorting back to your old lifestyle. He says there, the very first word in verse 8, formerly, when you did not know God, he's saying you're going to go back to the same thing. Now think about this. He is saying, if you begin to live a life like a Jewish person, it's the same thing as you were living before you became a Christian. Because both religions, both the pagan religion that you were a part of and the Jewish religion, they operate under the same principle. They both look at other things other than Christ for salvation. See, the pagans, the Greek pagans, what do they believe? They believe that behind every created thing, there was a spirit, a God, what they called a stoike, right? So behind the sun and the water and fire and earth and wine and agriculture and war, there were gods. And fertility, there were gods. There were stoike, there were spirits. And so if you wanted a specific blessing or a specific favor in each of these areas, if you were a fisherman and you wanted to have a successful run out in the ocean, who would you worship? The stoic or the spirit behind that deity. you would worship the god of the seas. If you wanted to have children, if you wanted to leave descendants, who would you worship? You would worship the goddess of fertility, Artemis, right? That's what you would do. And what the Apostle Paul says, can't you see that that lifestyle is a lifestyle of slavery, because you always find yourself bargaining with your deity and with your God for blessings. The more blessings you want, the more it's required of you, the more it's required that you sacrifice and that you serve and you worship your deity. So if you are familiar with Greek mythology, there's a story of Agamemnon. How many of you know the story of Agamemnon? He was the Greek king that wanted to sail to the city of Troy to bring back his brother's wife. And he summons his army, and they're about to sail, but he cannot sail because the winds are not favorable for him to sail. And the reason for that is because just a few days back, while he was hunting, he happened to kill this sacred animal. And now Artemis, the goddess, was ticked at him and was not giving him favorable winds to sail across to Troy. So the seer, right, the sage, comes to him and says, okay, you want the favorable winds to sail to Troy to fulfill your mission? He says, absolutely. He says, well, you have to sacrifice your eldest daughter on the altar for the god. And that's what he does. He sacrifices his daughter, and he gets favorable wind, and he sails to Troy. And the rest is history, literally. But can't you see, it's an enslaving lifestyle, that you're always having to bargain for blessings, all the requirements that come to you. Again, the Apostle Paul is saying all that it is not gospel. What God has done is idolatry. Now, some of you are listening to this and you're saying, well, I'm not necessarily a religious person, Pastor. I'm a, therefore, free person, right? I'm so glad that I'm not like the rest of you religious. That's why I'm a free person. Some people believe, like Karl Marx used to say, that religion is the opium or the drug of the masses. And you're saying, oh, I'm so glad. And what I want you to understand is this, and this is where we come to the point of admitting idolatry. Not just defining, but admitting idolatry. That every single one of us, regardless of the religion that we proclaim, we are religious people. The human heart always is asking for help beyond their own environment. They're always looking at other things. You are looking for other things, or looking at other things. You are trusting other things. You are hoping in other things to come and rescue and to save you and to give your life significance and meaning. Maybe you don't worship a Greek deity of the olds. Maybe you don't worship the God of the Bible. Maybe you don't consider yourself a Christian, but you have a deity in your life that you worship. We all worship. There was this writer, an atheist man by the name of David Foster Wallace. He's already dead, by the way. He was a novelist. And David Foster Wallace, several years ago, before he actually committed suicide, this atheist man, he gave a speech to a graduating college class. He was telling college students, look, now you're going into the world and you're going to have to work hard, but I want you to be aware of this, that we all worship. This is what he says. He says, everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship. And the compelling reason for maybe choosing some sort of God or spiritual type thing to worship is that pretty much anything else you worship will eat you alive. If you worship money and things, if they are where you tap for real meaning in life, then you will never have enough, never feel you have enough. Worship your body and beauty and sexual allure, and you will always feel ugly. And when the time and age start showing up, you will die a million deaths before they finally grieve you. Worship power. You will end up feeling weak and afraid, and you will need ever more power over others to numb you to your own fear. The insidious thing about these forms of worship is they're unconscious, they're default settings. What is he saying? He's saying that, okay, you may not worship a Greek deity, you may not worship the God of the Bible, you may not worship the law or a code of morality or a race, but you may worship work, you may worship achievement and success, you may worship image and beauty and sexual allure, you may worship power. There's something in your life right now, every single one of us, that is central, that is core, that we devote our thought life, that we devote our time, that we devote all of our resources in order to have, because we believe that if we have, our life will have significance and meaning. Can't you see that there is something central in your life other than Christ? And you know it's central because you can't go to sleep without thinking about it. You can't wake up in the morning without thinking about it. All your time, all your strategizing, all your efforts are going to that which you believe will ultimately save you. For some parents, it's their children. I don't have a good history, but I'm hoping, I'm banking on my kids. I'm giving them the best education. I'm giving them the best so that they will succeed in life and redeem our family's name. A lot of parents are enslaved by their children. Their children tell them what to do, command them what to do, demand what they ought to do. They're enslaved by their children. They can't go anywhere without asking the approval of their God. Can I do that? Now think about this. Idols are not bad things. Children are not bad things. Nature is not a bad thing. The elements of nature are not bad. But an idol is anything that is good that you have made the best thing in your life, and it is taking the place of God. That's why religion robs us of freedom, because at its core it's idolatry and it enslaves us. Now, second question, how does religion rob us of freedom? In other words, how does religion keep us in bondage? How does religion enslave us? Whether it's formal religion or informal religion, whether it is organized religion or personal individual religion, whether religion is focused on a transcendental deity or something that is material and it's earthly. How does it keep us in bondage? By the demands that it places on us. Look at what the Apostle Paul says in verse 21. He says, tell me, you who desire to be under the law, do you not listen to the law? He's saying some of you are crazy about living as a Jewish person, submitting yourself to the Jewish law, not just to the moral law, but to the dietary laws and to the ceremonial laws. And he's saying, look, don't you understand what the law is requiring of you? Don't you listen to what the law is saying to you? What the law is saying to you is this: you want salvation, you want significance, you want meaning. I demand perfection from you. That's what the law is saying to you. I demand perfection from you. And the Apostle Paul is saying, by the way, none of you will ever be able to work yourself up to perfection because you are imperfect sinners. You will always fail the demands of the law. And he's saying even before that the reason why the law was given in the first place is so that we can see that we cannot fulfill it. Therefore, we need a Savior. You get the point? So he's saying, look, listen, the law is asking you perfection. Why are you working for something that you will never achieve? The law is demanding that from you. And you know what? What's interesting, folks, is that every God, every religion that we follow, formal or informal, every God that we worship, small g, that we worship, will make demands to us. Demands that we cannot fulfill. So let's say you worship success and achievement, and you're saying, I'm going to live my life to be a successful person so that others may recognize me for my professional abilities, and it's only then, you say to yourself, it's only then when I get success, when I get to the top, that I will be fully loved by others, that I will find my real purpose and meaning in life. So I'm going to work for that. But then your work comes to you and says this, your God, your false God of work and success says, hey, I'm the God of success. I understand that you want my blessing. You say, oh yeah. And then that God says to you, well, I want you to sacrifice to me. And you say, well, how should I sacrifice to you? Very much like Agmenon in Greek mythology. I want you to sacrifice your family, and I want you to sacrifice your marriage and your kids on my altar. And you do. The other day I was talking to a successful CEO, and he was telling me, he's saying, Pastor, my life is a disaster. My children are a disaster. My marriage is a disaster. I'm already in my third marriage. It's already a disaster. And he's saying, no one gets to this level in my life without destroying their families first. What is that? That's your God saying, you want my blessings. You have to sacrifice it in my altar. Are you willing to sacrifice it in my altar? And we do, guys. Oh, is image, do you want to be beautiful? You got to sacrifice in my altar. See, your face doesn't look right. You got to do a surgery. And then you do one more surgery and another. And then the person looks completely deformed, looks like a cartoon, right? Have you seen people like that? Looking like a cartoon. What is that? But their God saying to them, it's not enough. You got to sacrifice a little bit more. It's not enough. You got to sacrifice a little bit more. And then all of a sudden you sense, man, this is a burden way too heavy to carry. You are enslaved. You are deformed. You are destroyed. You are robbed of your own humanity. Religion keeps you, regardless of what religion you follow, religion keeps you in bondage through its demands. And ultimately, every religion, every God that you bow down to and worship will ultimately disappoint you. Not only because your sacrifices are not enough, but because your sacrifices are not enough, you are robbed of joy. You're a miserable person. You have no joy because you are afraid that you know that if you fail your God will not forgive you, your God will crush you. How many of you guys like WrestleMania? By the way, who shout at? All right. Okay, I can't see, it's all dark. I don't like WrestleMania, but I was listening on NPR this week. Somebody was being interviewed for the very first time. I don't know if it happened or if it's about to happen. That tells you that I don't follow WrestleMania. But for the very first time, they're going to feature two women as the main event of WrestleMania. And one of the women in that main event is a woman by the name of Ronda Rousey. Now, Ronda Rousey is an Olympian judoist. She fought judo in the Olympics in the past. And then she transitioned to the sport of MMA, where she, for a long time, was undefeated as a fighter. Pretty much every single woman that was placed in a ring with her ended caught in an arm bar. She would submit everybody. And people were saying, oh my gosh, she has the looks, but she's also like a very good fighter. She will never lose. She is undefeated. Until one day, she got knocked out. She lost. Several years later, after I think 15 straight wins, something like that, she lost. And after she lost, I remember she went to the Ellen DeGeneres show. Now, who's a fan of Ellen DeGeneres? So she goes to the Ellen DeGeneres show, and she's giving an interview about what does it feel after many years to experience your first loss. And this is what she says. You want to hear what she says? This is what she says. Honestly, she says to Ellen, honestly, my thought, I was in the medical room and I was down in the corner and I was like, what am I anymore if not this? Ronda said, or Rousey said. I was literally sitting there and thinking about killing myself. And that exact second, I'm like, I'm nothing. What do I do anymore? And no one gives a bleep about me anymore without this. she said her identity was so rooted in her career because that was her way of getting love and approval from others, that she thought that if she could no longer win or entertain her fans by winning those matches, that she was no longer a person, that she had lost her complete purpose of living and existing. See, that's what our idols will do to us. They will disappoint us. They will curse us. They will crush us when we fail them. You know, some of you don't want to live anymore because you have failed your idol and your idol has crushed and disappointed you. Think about an athlete, her career, all the dedication, all the time, all the sacrifice that she made, and then to experience a loss. I am no one without this loss. You see what she's saying? See, that's what your idols will eventually do to you. They will crush you if you fail them. And so some of you I know are miserable. Some of you know, as a matter of fact, that you are failing your God and you are robbed of joy because you're restless and you're too busy about getting the blessing and bargaining with your God. You're afraid and you are enslaved. You're driven by fear and therefore you are enslaved. But listen, there's hope. There's hope. And the Apostle Paul is reminding the Galatian believers of that hope. And I want to remind you of that hope. That there is a power that can free you from the bondage of our religions. And I say our religions because it's not just formal religions that we're talking about here, isn't it? There is a power. So what can free us from the bondage of our religions? Only Jesus. Only Jesus. Look at chapter 5, verse 1, right? I should have printed that verse. I didn't print it. I don't know why, but it's in the Bible app. It's on the screen behind me. Look at what the Apostle Paul says. It's a continuing verse after verse 31 of chapter 4. He says, "For freedom Christ has set us free. Stand firm, therefore, and do not submit again to a yoke of slavery." The Apostle Paul is saying, look, the only way that you can break the bondage, that you can break the curse, that you can break the chains from the idols that keep you in bondage, from the religion that you proclaim and follow, is worshiping Christ. You have to switch your worship. You have to begin to worship Christ. How so? How so? In me worshiping Christ, I am delivered from the bondage of that which keeps me captive. Like I said to you, remember? Christ is the only one that before demanding anything from you, he will give to you, and he will give to you sacrificially. See, all the other gods, they will demand of your life first sacrifice, and it's never enough. And if you fail them, they will not forgive you. Jesus is the only God that before saying, hey, I want you to live your life for me. I want you to live your life for the sake of others. He says, but before all this, I have given my life for you. I have sacrificed myself on the altar of God for you so that you can have freedom. For freedom, Christ has set us free. And by the way, if you fail me, I will forgive you as well. See, can't you see that brings in a huge amount of freedom into your life? See, most of us are standing in Mount Sinai, which Paul mentions here in verse 25. What is Mount Sinai? Mount Sinai is the mount that Moses received the 10 commandments from God. That's what Mount Sinai is. And, Moses climbed up that mountain and he waited for God, and God showed up and gave him the commandments. But he couldn't stay there very long because that's a place of perfection. It's a place where there is smoke and fire that will consume any imperfection. And so Moses couldn't stay there. Moses had to go back down the mountain. But it's a mountain that requires you obedience, and it requires you perfection. And many of us are living our life standing on Mount Sinai, where the law hangs over our heads, its demands. But Jesus climbed up another mountain for us. See, he says here that those who stand in Sinai in verse 25 are in bondage, but those who stand in the Jerusalem above, those are free. What is he talking about? So if you go to Jerusalem, it's a city with 3 mountain chains. And in the middle mountain chains, there's a little hill there that you have to climb, to get to Jerusalem. You have to climb this mountain. But there's a little hill by the name of Calvary. And that was the hill that Christ climbed up in order to be crucified on. And what the Apostle Paul is saying is, what you must do is you must switch your standing. You must leave Sinai, and you must stand on Calvary. Because on Calvary, that's the mount of your freedom, where Christ fulfilled the demands of the law and paid the penalty in your place. And so if you have to exist in freedom, you must stand on Mount Calvary. And the call, therefore, for all of us here today is to leave the mountain of law, Mount Sinai, which is in Egypt, and to climb Mount Calvary and bow down at Jesus' feet and worship him, because he is worthy of our praise, and he will liberate us. In him there is freedom. In him there is liberation. If the Son has set you free, the Apostle Paul says in another passage, you are free indeed. You don't have to live anymore basing your life on the approval of others, looking at other things for hope and salvation, because you are forever secure in the freedom that Christ has conquered for you. And that is the call for you today. And if you go to Jesus today, if you switch your standing, you will experience the promises that he talks about here in verses 27. And he says, he's quoting a passage from Isaiah 54. He says, rejoice, O barren one who does not bear. Break forth and cry out loud, you who are not in labor. For the children of the desolate one will be more than those of the one who has a husband. What is he saying here? He says, if you go to Jesus, even though you may think you're barren, you will be more fruitful than even the woman with a husband. And you're saying, what does he mean? What is he talking about? Let me give you a story to illustrate that. I'm going to close my sermon with this. I was listening to a pastor. He was telling us the story of how this church in Harlem, New York, was started. It was a church called Bethel Gospel Church. And the way this church was started in Harlem was this German lady in the early 1900s was doing a Bible study with 2 African-American blue-collar women. And these women were growing in their faith, and they came to this lady, this German lady, and they said, hey, you ought to come to our neighborhood and you ought to do the Bible study there, because then we can bring our friends and others can grow in their faith. Why don't you come to our neighborhood? So she went back, this German lady, and she consulted with her fiance. She was engaged at the time. And because of the racial issues back then, which in many ways are still present today, her fiance said, if you go there to do this Bible study in Harlem, I will no longer marry you. And moreover, no one will want to marry you. But because she was free, because that man was no longer her source of approval and love and hope and trust, and was Christ, she said to him, I'm going to go. You can stay with me if you want to. Well, he left her. But now today, if you go there, it's a church filled with people helping the community. She, in fact, is the barren woman that has more children than the woman with the husband. Because she is free, she can experience the promise of the gospel in her life. My prayer to you today is that you will experience this freedom. And not only that, you would see this freedom unfold in your life in ways like that lady was able to see. I pray for you that you would admit your idolatry and that you would switch your standing from all the other gods that you worship, and you would give your life to Jesus Christ. Let's pray. Father, we are grateful for what Jesus Christ has done for us. Father, we pray that you would show us the things in our lives that have become ultimate, the things in our lives that are good, that we have made the best things. Father, may we repent and confess, and may we come to Jesus. In his name we pray. Amen.